Okay, here we go. Stand by. 3, 2, 1, action.
Assume nothing.
Brash, bald-faced blasphemy.
Question everything.
I find it extremely hard to imagine.
Open your eyes.
It is quite all right to be an atheist.
The fastest growing group of people in the country has been measured as being those who have no belief or who are atheists.
You don't have to be apologetic or quiet about it.
Challenge the opposition.
You see religion on 100 fronts losing the argument.
And start thinking. This is The Thinking Atheist Worldwide.
Today's show brought to you by my supporters on Patreon. And if you're not familiar with what Patreon is, it's a way for content creators to fund their work. I'm very thankful for my sponsors, but the patrons really help to fill the gap and keep the wheels turning, and it makes a difference. It allows me to do what I do. So if the show brings benefit to you and your life, if you enjoy having the broadcast every week and you would like to support it, you can just set it up how you want. You can support with $1 a show or $1 a month or just whatever. You can go to patreon.com/Seth Andrews, and you are greatly appreciated. Thanks to everybody for the kind words about last week's Ghost Stories broadcast. It's, it's a lot of work to put those together, but it sure is fun to get the feedback from people who say they listened and they got goosebumps and, they jumped at all the right times. People are telling me about the scenarios that they were listening. Oh, yeah, we were in the living room and we turned all the lights off. Every year I seem to get a message from at least one person who listens while they're out jogging after dark. You can imagine you get the earbuds in there and you block out the outside world. And before you know it, all the sounds of the devils and the spirits and the screams can really jack with your head. And people freak themselves out. They're getting back home as quickly as possible. And that's a great compliment. Hey, Seth, you scared the shit out of me. And that's a great compliment. And I'm thankful for that. I'm amazed at how many people use the Ghost Stories broadcast to introduce their non-atheist friends and family to the show. They'll be like, well, you're not an atheist. It's fine. But you still need to listen to this one broadcast. It's not about atheism. It's just a fun ghost story show. And so people who are religious or whatever, they come in and join the ride, and then they come back the week after or the week after that, and they become introduced to much of the other content, the other discussions that we have. And a few people have kind of gotten hooked. So it's been useful, but it's also just a nice distraction and a lot of fun. So thanks again. You can find it in the archive from last week, Ghost Stories 2017. Next Tuesday's show, I've almost talked myself out of it 10 times. But I'm going to go ahead and pull the trigger and just do it. I've got a broadcast called Is the Atheist Movement Dying? Now, I've been doing this for a while. And probably for the last 18 months to 2 years off and on, I will see these warnings, these wailings about the death of the atheist movement, however you choose to define it, and good luck with that. And we're going to get into that next week, the definitions and sort of the category and how you frame it, how different people frame it in different ways. But a lot of people they're frustrated because they see some very public infighting and they see the drama and the chaos and all this stuff going on, and they've just checked out. And, I've seen some fellow activists. They've just walked. They've had enough. Life's too short for all this drama and division and fighting and chaos. There are other fights I would like to be involved in. I'd like to refocus on the bigger picture. So is the atheist movement dissipating? Is it shredding itself to pieces? Is it dying on the vine? Is it obsolete? Is it whatever? And I hear these charges quite a bit, and I would like to address them, if I may, from the perspective of an activist next Tuesday. It's my goal, as is always my goal with this broadcast, to approach the subject responsibly and fairly, listening to the various perspectives out there, and then offering a perspective of my own, which I hope will be a balanced and even-toned perspective, given from someone who is on the front lines of atheist activism today. So we're going to do that next Tuesday. I would encourage you, if you're already in your heart thinking, God, no, I just can't listen to any more of this drama, relax. I have a feeling you will leave next week's show encouraged, okay? I'm going to give you something. I'm not going to blow smoke up your ass. I'm literally going to give you some good news, something to be encouraged about. So that's Tuesday of next week, okay? In keeping with the Halloween season, we are doing a broadcast on fears and phobias. I know we did this 3 or 4 years ago, something like that, but it's just such a good topic. I threw a feeler out on social media just to see the responses, and hundreds upon hundreds of them came back because it's such a relatable thing. And it was just too good to pass up. So that's what we're talking about today, and I think you're going to have a really good time as we vicariously experience some of the fears and phobias of our listeners. I guess we must start by saying what's a phobia as opposed to simply what is a fear. A phobia, as Merriam-Webster describes it, is a persistent, irrational fear of a specific object, activity, or situation that leads to a compelling desire to avoid it. And we're going to deal with many irrational fears and some rational ones as well on this broadcast. But the phobia most fascinates me, this persistent fear that leads to sufferers of phobia avoiding things at all costs. And the final segment of our broadcast, we're going to get our science on. We're going to sort of drudge up everybody's phobias. I thought it'd be great to have Dr. Caleb Lack back on the show. He is an educator, an author, and a clinical psychologist. And he's going to talk about phobias from the perspective of a mental health professional, how they're defined, how they might be approached and treated. We're going to get into the science of phobias for the last portion of the broadcast today. Let me begin with an email from Tara. She said, "You ask about phobias. I've got a big one." She said, "I'm afraid of 3 a.m. I'm afraid of clowns, the dark, and spiders, but they're nothing like 3 a.m. I wrote a while ago about embracing death instead of fearing it. Death! Well, 3 a.m. blows that one out of the water. I'm actually curious to see how many people share this fear. I've met a few, but it's always nice to know I'm not alone. This fear is a relic of my Catholic upbringing. We were told growing up that the witching hour was 3 a.m., no matter where you were. 3 a.m. We were told demons come out then and are allowed to roam free for 1 hour every day, 3 to 4 a.m. That's when possessions happen and everything can go wrong. If caught out of bed, you can be attacked, possessed, or killed. Your house can be burned down, animals attacked, etc. If you smell something burning, they're in your house. If you hear movement outside your bedroom door, they're in your hallway scratching. They're looking around. I have cats, Tara says. Do you know what living hell they put me through? I'm an atheist now, so I get how silly it is, but it was put in my head for so many years I can't seem to shake it. If I wake up and I have to pee between 3 and 4 a.m., I'll wait. No kidding. It was hell for me. When my kids were babies, they always seemed to wake up just before 3. Imagine facing the fear of death and possession every day, even when you don't believe in it. It's maddening. My heart races, my hands get clammy, I shake and completely freeze. I'm 34 years old, she said, and I haven't believed in this crap in over a decade. It just shows how deep indoctrination gets to some of us. Tara, thanks for sharing your irrational fear. I've got Deanna on Skype. Deanna, you're on the Thinking Atheist radio podcast. How are you?
I'm doing well. Hope you are.
I am indeed. We're talking about fears and phobias. Do you have something to contribute to the broadcast today?
Well, I just have kind of a unique quirk about myself that when I am reading a book in the bathtub, if there's a jacket with the author's photo on the back, I cannot have that on the book while I'm in the bathtub because I feel like they can see me. So,
all right, wait, hang on, Deanna, hang on, hold on.
Okay.
Hang on. All right, you have a book, and the author's photo, portrait, whatever, is on the back of the book jacket.
On the jacket, yes.
You like to read in the tub, it's your time, you're relaxing, very private time for you, right?
Right.
And you open the book, now the author's face can see you.
Well, I know rationally that they can't, but it creeps me out.
So you take the jacket and do what with it?
Set it aside. I set it aside, and when I'm not in the tub, I put it back on.
Did this start recently, or has it always been that way?
As long as I can remember.
It's a great story. I love these. We've all got little things that we blush a little bit when we tell other people about them. I hadn't really thought of it, but I guess it could contribute to the feeling of being watched.
Absolutely.
Yeah, do you have any others, Deanna? Anything else that makes you crazy? Spiders or something like that? I mean, or is this the big one?
I don't like spiders. I respect spiders. I will try not to kill them if I can avoid it, but I don't. If they touch me, all bets are off. So I'll try to catch them in a cup or something and throw them outside, but yes.
I'm kind of the same way. I used to be like, it's a spider, kill it. It's a snake, kill it, when I was much younger. And now it's more like, let's scoop it up and, hey, it kills bugs and it's just doing its thing. And unless it's a threat, like we have a problem in Oklahoma with these brown recluse spiders that they hole up inside your shoes, especially during hot weather. They can come in, and one bite from the brown recluse can do some real damage. And so you really don't have much choice. Or if there are small children and there's a black widow or whatnot. But, the wolf spiders, and they're kind of scary looking in some contexts. But I just scoop them up and put them out whenever I can. I totally get that.
Right. I like snakes. I've had pet snakes before.
What kind?
It was a corn snake.
Now, describe the corn snake to me. I'm drawing a blank. Describe the corn snake.
So they have kind of a rust-colored pattern on the back. It looks underneath. They look like Indian corn. The decorative stuff you use for holidays.
Yeah.
So on the bottom they look like that, which is allegedly how they got their name. And on the top they have kind of a rust-colored pattern that some people say looks like a copperhead, but really looks nothing like a copperhead.
What was your snake's name?
Fred.
Oh, Fred the snake. Just a member of the family.
I had Fred for about 10 years.
I had a friend who, she had a king snake. It was this white and black snake. It was about 5 feet long. And she kept in the freezer these frozen mice because she didn't want to feed it live rodents. Her heart couldn't take that. And I'm kind of glad because, the idea of a rodent getting suffocated to death and then devoured. For some reason, it seemed better when she pulled these rodents out of a bag, out of her freezer.
I did the same thing.
She would put them in, I think, warm water to defrost them. And then she would put them on the end of some tongs and wiggle it like it was alive. And she would just stick it in the cage and the snake would just bound out and devour it immediately. Does that sound familiar? Was that your method?
That's very familiar. I didn't like feeding them. Well, I didn't feed them live because they can harm the snake.
No, you're worried about the snake.
Well, I'm worried about the snake, but I also don't like to kill the little mice either.
Little mice, they're so cute.
Well, when he was younger, he ate little pinky mice, which are the little hairless babies.
Oh,
and those I used to buy live, and I didn't like that. Would make that little squeaky sound when he tried to eat them.
Man, you're scarring me psychologically. I can't. My heart can't take it. I mean, don't they have like Purina snake chow? Isn't there something that doesn't involve pinky mice that we could feed these things?
I wish there were.
Well, it's, I've come to respect the snake. I've heard people say that snakes would sometimes crawl up under the covers to get warm at night. I don't know if that's something they're just tweaking me or if that's actually a thing. But, snakes are looking for warmth.
Well, mine had a little heated area, a little heating pad under the cage. And he could crawl into that area if he wanted to. So it was a temperature gradient.
All right.
In the aquarium.
Fine with snakes and spiders, but don't be the author on the back of a book cover, or you're going to have to go away. All right.
Have a problem.
We'll dedicate this segment of the show to Fred's memory, Deanna, and thank you so much for being a part of the broadcast.
We'll talk to you later.
Here's one of mine. If I can share a personal story quickly. Anybody who follows me, follows my work, is probably familiar with the fact of how much I travel. I mean, I'm always traveling. I feel like I'm always in an airport getting on a plane. And largely have enjoyed flying. I mean, really, I don't enjoy sitting in the airport. Like, nothing sucks your will to live, like sitting at the gate, waiting on your flight, waiting to board. But the actual flying portion to me is pleasant. I'm not a fan of heights. Like if I climb up do you guys see the video of those people who were on that glass platform It opened last year. It's the world's biggest glass bottom platform in China. It's like 1,200 feet above ground. And it's got a totally glass bottom. And there's video online of people who are walking out there. Others are being dragged out there. And some are just weeping and crying. Some fall down on all fours and they're crawling. They're grasping onto anything. They have their eyes closed. They're having to be led off the platform. I would be the person who was on all fours. I would lose the ability to stand. My heart would be about to explode out of my chest. I have that kind of fear of heights, okay? But being in an airplane is not a problem. But for some reason, it started, I think, in 2014. I don't think I've mentioned this on the radio. I started to develop anxiety about flying. And for a period of about 2 years, and it's gone now. It doesn't bother me like it did. But for about 2 years, while we were sitting at the gate, if the pilot came on and gave us the advance warning, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to remind you that we're not going to have beverage service during this flight because there is some stormy weather. We are expecting some chop, some turbulence on the ascent, and probably for the first, say, 45 minutes to an hour of the flight, we are going to keep the seatbelt sign on, so I would encourage you to stay in your seats, and it might be a little bumpy out there. All right, that's all I had to hear. My palms would sweat, my heart would start to beat like violently, and I would sit there just petrified. It was weird. What would I have been, 46 probably? 46 years old, been flying for most of my life, certainly over the past 15 years. Because even when I was a video producer, we traveled from state to state to state. We did most of our shooting on location. Flying, not a problem. Not a problem. Usually flying in storms, not a problem. I remember I was flying into Houston. Storms, big poofy storm clouds with these tiny little sort of avenues between them. And the pilot was navigating through them. And the plane was just getting kicked around like a paper cup in the sky. I didn't know the person sitting next to me. 15 minutes later, we were almost like foxhole buddies in a war. You know what I'm saying? You know, hold me. If you survived the crash, tell my family I love them. I mean, it was that kind of thing. And I would just sit there in the chair, just trying to breathe it out. And then a year ago, it stopped. Like, I know how safe airplanes are. I know that you'd almost have to bend the damn wing off the plane in order to damage it. I know. A pilot once told me that planes want to fly. I mean, the way they are designed, they want to stay airborne. And then when you hit that turbulence, you're only dropping a few feet, right? Feels worse than it is usually. Logically, I totally know that it's fine. But for a period of about 2 years, from 2014 to, I think, middle of last year is finally when it started to wane. And I have no idea why. I can't think of anything that changed in my life. I can't think of any habits that became different. I didn't do any sort of like meditation or relaxing exercises. It just got better. It was weird. Weird. I'm still not a fan of turbulence. Trust me. I mean, I'm still not a fan. But all of a sudden, for this one chapter in my life, I had a tremendous fear. In fact, because of the fear of turbulence, I had a tremendous fear of flying, which for someone who is always on a plane is kind of a problem. I don't know. Can anybody relate to that? Like, have you ever been through anything like that? Where you all of a sudden experienced it and then it was gone? It's weird. I have Justin on Skype. You're on the Thinking Atheist radio podcast. We're talking about fears, rational and irrational fears. You have a story for us?
Yeah. So when I was a kid, about 8 or 9 years old, I saw this movie called White Dwarf. It was this silly little, it was supposed to be a TV series, but they turned it into a TV movie at the last minute because I guess it didn't fly. And it's not a particularly scary movie, but there is this one creature in it that it's this worm that burrows through your foot, eats its way through your body, and finally makes its way into your brain before it finally consumes your brain. So it's kind of gruesome in that sense, but it's not very graphic. But there is one scene where a guy assassinates a king by putting him to sleep with a sleeping draft, and he puts the worm in his foot, and it's a very slow, painful death. He kills the king that way, and ever since seeing that, I cannot sleep with my feet uncovered.
Oh, yeah, of course. I mean, you never know when the white dwarf worm is going to sneak into the room.
Yeah, absolutely.
Enter your body through the feet. It's like sympathy pain. Someone talks about a worm digging into your foot, and you do find yourself sort of reacting a little bit. You know?
Oh, yeah, I can actually feel a pressure on my foot when I'm talking about it.
Now, how old were you when you first encountered the film?
I was about in between 8 and 10. I don't remember exactly, but...
While you were talking, I pulled it up on Internet Movie Database. 1995 White Dwarf. Humor me for just a second. In a distant future New York medical student, Driscoll Rampart, accomplishes his internship at Rusta, a rural planet that doesn't revolve around its axis and therefore is divided into contrasting halves of eternal day versus eternal night. Does this sound about right?
That's it.
One is a Victorian-styled colony, the other a medieval kingdom. Both leave Rampart in a state of constant wonder as he finds his way among humans and aliens, strange dreams, and even stranger reality, a dark keep, a red sea, and more universal matters of war and peace. It's sort of a nebulous description. Can I find this on YouTube?
I don't know. I know VHS copies run for about $50 on eBay. It's kind of a cult classic thing.
$50? People pay that, you think?
I don't know. I know I've seen it again as an adult, and it's not something that I would really want to pay $50 for. But it was fun to watch it again and kind of laugh at how silly it was for me to get so scared of it.
And even now, though, you keep your feet covered, right? You keep your feet under the covers.
I cannot. If I try to go to sleep with my feet uncovered, could be the hottest day of the year. If I uncover my feet, I actually feel a pressure on my foot, and it's just not comfortable. So just throw a sheet on it.
The freaking white dwarf worm. I don't blame you a bit, Justin. That's awesome. Thanks for sharing your phobia with us on the radio, and have a happy Halloween, my friend.
All right, you too.
It just came to mind, this whole idea of a parasitic creature that crawls into your body. BBC did a story on this just last year about this creature that is supposed to live in the Amazon basin. It's called the Candiru, Candiru. It's a tiny fish. It's like a little worm-like fish. It has little barbs all over it. And this thing is the stuff of horror movies. So if you go out and let's say you walk into the waters of the Amazon basin and you relieve yourself, apparently this little creature will follow the stream of warm urine. It will swim up into your genitals. And then using its little barbs and spikes, it will lodge itself there so it cannot be extricated. You can't just yank it out. And it feasts on you from the inside. I mean, it's just the stuff of nightmares, okay? And there's other stories about, they're laying eggs in your bladder and the larvae are born inside you. Oh, and the stories of this stuff are everywhere. But apparently there's still some disagreement about how much of this is true and how much of it is legend. Some of the stories originating back in the 19th century, and they were talking about fish that were very small but uniquely occupied in, quote, doing evil, which gives you a sense of perhaps some hyperbole in place, maybe some storytelling in place. Is this creature genuine and real? The local communities lived in constant fear of this tiny fish that could just crawl inside you at your most vulnerable spots and eat you alive. Scientific researchers actually studied the behavior of this Candirus. It presented the Candirus with live fish and other chemical attractants like ammonia, and the fish seemed totally not interested in any chemical cues, but appeared to have its sort of carnivorous instincts triggered more by sight. It sees another fish and it goes after it with gusto. Is the Candiru a myth? Is it merely a story told to frighten people, to keep them from urinating in the streams? I don't know. But I'll tell you this, it's given me pause. There's been more than one occasion when I've drifted into waist-deep water and wondered if there was a tiny little barbed, toothed parasitic, fishy, wormy, evil demon thing that treated the genitals as a kind of front door to the buffet. Okay? It has given me pause, and now I suspect it may give you pause as well. Area code 615, you are on the Thinking Atheist radio podcast. Who's this?
This is Sam.
Hi, Sam. Fears and phobias, the topic of the day. Do you have a phobia?
I don't know if it's quite a phobia, but it's definitely a strange fear, and that's that I'm a little bit afraid of fish.
You're afraid of fish?
Yes.
What about fish bothers you?
I think it's the eyes. The eyes in the scales are a little bit strange looking to me. They make me almost nauseous when I see them, really.
Okay, so you're at a restaurant and someone orders the fish and they don't bring out just the fillet. You've seen them. They bring out the plate that's got the whole fish on it with the head and the eyes and everything. What's your reaction?
Yeah, probably to move a couple seats over.
Don't even want to be near it, huh?
No, even the smell of fish kind of gets me.
You don't go swim in the lake or the ocean then? No?
No. What's funny is my dad actually lived really close to the beach too, but I'll get in like ankle deep, I think. But if I see the fish, then I just don't want to get in. If I don't see them, actually, I have no problem of just getting in the water. But once I see them, that's kind of it for me.
All right. No fish for Sam. I got you. Well, thanks for sharing your fear for the radio.
Thank you.
Area code 801. You're on the Thinking Atheist radio podcast. Tell me your name.
This is Abby.
Abby, let's talk about phobias. Do you have some, or at least one?
Yeah, I've got one that's been with me since I was a little kid. Is about 5. I'm terrified of sharks in swimming pools.
Sharks in swimming pools?
Sharks in swimming pools, but not the ocean. I can actually swim in the ocean just fine. I discovered that when I went to the beach for the first time in California and just kind of hopped in the waves and didn't give a second thought to it, but wouldn't swim in the hotel swimming pool because I was going to get et.
I mean, what happened? Is there a genesis to this story? Did you have a trauma?
No, there's no trauma. I think it was a factor of two things. My older brother went swimming with me one day and stuck his hand down the pool filter openings and started screaming that a shark had him. And then I did a lot of amateur studying of sharks, so I read every book I could get my hands on. Sorry, let me move out of the room.
It's all right. You got your hands full out there. You take your time. Take care of your people. It's all good. We've got plenty of breathing room on the broadcast today. If I may, I'm giving away my age, but it was back in 1975 when the Steven Spielberg classic Jaws released to theaters, and being afraid to swim in a swimming pool, believe it or not, folks, was a thing. People everywhere reported that they couldn't even swim in the deep end of a pool after seeing Jaws because they were terrified. It just hit them at such a primal level. And so I'd wondered if maybe that provided the springboard for this particular fear.
It's possible. I think all of the reading I did too, which you'd figure an education in shark biology and things like that would make it so that I wasn't scared of swimming in swimming pools. But for whatever reason, it just stuck in my head that there is a shark whenever I get into a swimming pool and try free range swimming and things like that. So,
is it true that if we go out into the ocean, in many cases, there could be a shark mere feet from us and we'd never know it?
So Marie Levine, she's with the shark study, the shark, I forget the name of it. She's with an institute that studies sharks, and she said that any given time whenever you're in the ocean, you're probably only 10 to 20 feet away from any species of shark. So, yeah, it's quite possible. There's actually been drone footage of people in Cape Cod that are, kind of swimming in the waves and jumping through, and that you see great whites. I mean, we're not talking this is, little tiny dinky sharks. These are big predatory animals that are swimming within a couple of yards of the beachgoers. In the tropics, you're probably going to see more of the reef sharks, like, the little black tip reef sharks, or there might be something like an angel shark or what's known as a sand tiger shark. And those are relatively, you leave them alone, they'll leave you alone. And I'd say that with most species of sharks, if you just leave them alone, they'll leave you alone and not bother you any.
But in the
So-
swimming pool, right? I mean, there's no way for the shark to swim away, so you're trapped in the pool. There's a claustrophobic element added to it, so maybe that ramps up the intensity.
Yeah, and I know that for me, so on the way to the beach the first time, I looked into the swimming pool of the hotel, and the fact that the water was clear kind of gave me a little bit of a heart palpitation. And I think that it's a matter of, if I'm going to be eaten in a body of water, I don't want to see it coming.
I'm the exact opposite. Like if I'm in murky water and I'm treading water, like I'm a scuba diver, used to be, and I'm under the water, I'm fine because I can see all around me. But if I'm up on the ocean surface and my legs are dangling and I cannot see, it's like you do a 30-minute dive. It's the 90 seconds after you surface while you're waiting to board the boat that give me heart palpitations, because I feel so helpless. There's something under me. There may be anything under me and I can't see it. But the seeing it is for you more terrifying.
Yeah, I think that if I were to scuba dive or even snorkel, and if I saw a large shark, and a shark that I particularly knew was especially toothy, I'd probably flip out. I wouldn't be
All right,
happy
so next
about
time
that.
Abby goes swimming at the resort, let's take some food coloring. Let's just throw some stuff in the water. Let's murk it up a little bit so she can enjoy the vacation. She needs to be able to enjoy the pool, people. That's awesome, Abby. Thanks for sharing your phobia with us. I hope the Halloween season's good to you and the rest of the year as well, okay?
Absolutely, it should be.
Connie said, my phobia is getting stuck while trying to take off a piece of clothing over my head. I'm afraid I'll just get it up so far, and with my arms crossed and thereby pinned, I won't be able to get it any further. I just know I would end up in a panic, screaming for someone to get the scissors, get me out, get me out. She said, I've had more than a few one-sided arguments with myself in fitting rooms. I'll start to try on a shirt or a dress, and if it doesn't easily slide over my head, I get that panicky feeling, just sure that if I actually pull all the way on, I'll get stuck trying to get it off. I try to tell myself that it's a ridiculous fear, that nobody actually gets stuck halfway when trying to remove something over their head, but to no avail. I've walked away from many clothing items that I really liked because I'm afraid of getting stuck halfway in them. Daniel said, I'm afraid of the biscuit containers that automatically pop open when you peel off the cardboard. I will literally punch you and run away as fast as possible if you try to pop one of those things close to me. I'm also afraid of popping balloons. And I can't be around helium tanks when they're filling up balloons. I am so on board with you, Daniel. Chris said, I think I may have the most bizarre phobia that you or your listeners have ever heard of. I looked it up to try to find a specific name for it. I believe it is, Pterono phobia. Is it pteronophobia, or is the P silent? Pteronophobia? In layman's terms, it is the fear of being tickled. I'm sure you're probably wondering how anyone can be afraid of such a seemingly harmless act. But for me, tickling is no laughing matter. I believe it all started for me when I was just a kid. I've been incredibly ticklish my entire life, especially on the bottoms of my feet. My older siblings became well aware of this as we were growing up. They seemed to delight in using it as a form of torture to get me to comply with any demands that they had, or in order to force me to divulge information I possessed. If they ever got it in their head I was harboring any type of secret that they wished to know, they'd wait till my parents weren't around, and they'd use their sadistic tickle torment on me in order to get me to confess it. This was usually accomplished by luring me into one of their bedrooms. Then, when I least suspected, they would pounce. Within a matter of seconds, I'd find myself either pinned down, rolled up in a blanket, or restrained in some other fashion. Once I was all helpless, they would demand I give up the information they wanted. Being a stubborn kid, I typically refuse, as I struggled and threatened in an attempt to get them to let me go. It was at this point they'd remove my socks and shoes and begin the process of methodically tickling the soles of my feet. The tickle torture would go on until I eventually cracked and I told them everything they wanted to know. They were diabolical and were even known to employ the use of an old feather duster we had lying around the house. You have no idea how torturous tickling can be until you've been held down and had someone run hundreds of feathers up and down the most ticklish part of your anatomy. I have no doubt this is where my fear stems from. To this day, even the very threat of being tickled can be enough to get me to reveal information. Chris, I don't think that's an irrational fear at all. You were sort of accosted, you were duped, you were restrained, you had a loss of control, you were being overpowered and then subjected to a sensation that you found tremendously unpleasant. I think that's an absolutely rational fear, actually. Hell, just hearing the story, I found myself kind of getting the creeps, you know? I think many people in the audience would probably agree. We wouldn't want that done to us. No, I totally get that one. Area code 952, you're on the Thinking Atheist radio podcast. Tell me your name.
Jen.
Jen, we're doing fears and phobias. Do you have a story for us today?
I do.
What is it?
Well, I kind of have an unusual phobia of tinfoil, actually. When I was in high school, somebody told me that it's really a neat sensation when you bite into tinfoil if you have like dental work done. And being a young child with lots of cavities, I had plenty of dental work done. So I was given a wrapper to a Hershey's Kiss, and I bit into it, and it was the most horrifying feeling I had ever experienced in my entire life. And ever since then, I am really uncomfortable around tinfoil. Like, tinfoil on food, I have to, like, really make sure, like, no pieces get stuck to it. You know, I tried to stop cooking, like, with tinfoil and used wax paper instead, but I hated the fact that my kitchen would always smell like melting crayons. So I still use some tinfoil for cooking, but it just really, I get like anxious around it.
How about the sound? The sound of the crumpling of tinfoil?
Yeah, not real crazy about that. Crunching it up and stuff like that. Not a fan. I definitely can't eat Hershey's Kisses anymore because I don't like taking the foil off of it.
Well, Jen, when you bit down, when you had all the dental work done and whatever, the fillings, and you bit into the tinfoil, was it pain? Was it some other sensation?
I think I'd best describe it as like an electric shock. I mean, it was a sensation I had never experienced before, but yeah, it was just kind of, it was painful, but it did feel like an electric shock almost.
Do you have any tinfoil in the pantry right now?
I do. Like I said, I still try to cook with it because wax paper is just not my friend.
So it's an unholy alliance. Then it's an uneasy peace that you've made with the aluminum or tinfoil.
It is. It really is. But like I said, if I cook with it, I'm like very meticulous to make sure that food doesn't stick to it. And if like I get really nervous if like you're taking the food off the tinfoil and the tinfoil starts to tear, then I get kind of anxious.
Anybody else out there, I wonder, have this sort of fear, phobia, tinfoil? I'd be curious. Jan, I appreciate you sharing that for the broadcast. That's an interesting one. I hope you and yours have a good Halloween holiday too, okay?
Thank you.
Gurgley from Hungary says he has a terrible fear of frogs, all kinds of frogs, even the cute little tree frogs. He says, when I see one, especially if it's big and fat, I freeze up. My heart starts to pump faster. I get cold sweat all over. Michael said he grew up with 2 older sisters, but as soon as he hit puberty, he was twice their size. He is now terrified of tiny, angry women. Manuela said, water in the dark. She can't drive over a bridge over water in the dark without almost losing her mind. Many cited the fear of dentists, probably the dentist drill, I would guess, would be one of the reasons that you would be weird about sitting in the dentist chair, a feeling of helplessness and somebody putting a drill inside your mouth. Stacy said she has a weird phobia about anything that moves under her feet. Roller skates, skateboards, treadmills, anything that makes the ground feel unstable is, in her words, bad, bad, bad. This includes icy sidewalks. Tara said she won't eat anything with something in the middle. Most of the time, she can't even handle the word, I'm going to say it, Tara, stuffing. She says the S word in her post, stuffing. The stuff you generally cook inside a turkey at Thanksgiving. And it leads her friends to a million questions. She can't stand Twinkies because it has filling in the middle. Ding-dongs, Pop-Tarts, anything with something in the middle is an absolute no-no. Tara, you poor thing. You're missing out on the sheer joy of the Twinkie. Melissa Chen, she's an activist and a friend. She said she's got a phobia about fish. A fish phobia. Aquariums scare me. Chinese restaurants with live fish in the tanks scare me. In fact, when people serve dinner with the entire fish, not in fillet form, but the entire fish, it scares the crap, and she said she almost wrote carp. It scares the carp out of me. Needless to say, scuba diving is out of the question. Victor said he's terrified of those dog robots over at Boston Dynamics. As well you should be. Have you seen those videos on YouTube? Just go YouTube search it. Boston Dynamics dog robots. He says these things are the stuff of nightmares. And you're right. Well, first of all, I have two sensations. One is they take these dogs walking along, these robot dogs, and they try to kick them over. And the dogs will then sort of recover, reset, and stand back up. There's a part of me that gets pissed off. Like, what did you just do to that dog, man? I just project onto the robot as if it was a living creature. The second thing is you are seeing the early hints of the machines that will one day take over and rule us and potentially exterminate us. YouTube search Boston Dynamics dog robots. You will see what Victor is talking about. And I totally agree. Amber said she can't stand to be kissed, hugged, or held in any way in a doorway. Outside of the doorway is fine. In the doorway, absolutely not. She says she has no idea why. Peggy has a fear of being buried alive. Peggy, there's a film you should never see. It's called Buried. It stars Ryan Reynolds of Deadpool fame. And the whole movie essentially takes place inside a buried coffin. I mean, the opening scene is Ryan Reynolds waking up with a flashlight underground in a coffin. And the following 90 minutes is a claustrophobic's worst nightmare. Natalie almost couldn't get through it. Jenny said she's afraid of cotton balls. The thought of cotton balls makes her want to vomit. The sound of someone manipulating a cotton ball to her is like nails on a chalkboard. The worst part is she used to work at a vet clinic. All the new medication bottles had those little cotton balls in the top of them. They were her nemesis. Richard said he used to work in a bakery that had ovens that were big enough to walk in. Every day, 2 a.m., before he turned the oven on, he would look around because he had a fear of being pushed into the oven, unable to get out and potentially cooked alive. Several people mentioned they had an irrational fear of pool drains. Many people terrified of elevators. How about this one? Fingernails breaking off. This is a thing. And I'm holding my own fingernails as I tell the story. Right? Fingernails being torn or broken off. This is a tremendous fear for a great number of people out there. David Fitzgerald, author of the book The Mormons and Jesus Mything in Action and others, he actually chimed in. He said he has a fear of fractals. He says, when I look at them or even think about them too long, I get a distinct falling sensation, like I'm lost in time and space and meaning. I guess that's another YouTube search for us, isn't it? Fractals. It'll just mess with your head, man. I have area code 209. You're on the Thinking Atheist radio podcast. Tell me your name.
Amy.
Hi, Amy. Are you scared of anything out there? You got any rational or irrational fears? Any phobias?
I have a lot of phobias. One in particular is water, any kind of water, but specifically water you can't see through. It creeps me out.
Yeah?
Just something about not seeing the bottom of the water. Even like, plants touch you, fish touch you. It's creepy.
All right, so somebody says, come on, Amy, we're going to the lake. We're going to go swimming. And you say...
That's not happening.
Let's see, how do you... hell no, she types out. So on the email response or the text response. Anything else drive you crazy besides murky water?
So I have a fear of old people because they are frail and they can just go at any moment, and it kind of scares me.
All right, let's camp out here for just a second, Amy. No, hang on. Let's talk about this.
Sounds awful.
Well, I'm not judging you. I mean, you have a phobia, and you acknowledge that it's a phobia. Let's figure out what's going on. The fragility of the elderly. And they are in the winter of their lives. Is that a way to say that? Something like that?
Yeah.
Are you afraid of death?
I'm afraid of dying, but I'm not afraid to be dead.
Well, I don't think that's an irrational fear. I mean, a lot of people are thinking, how will I go? I hope it's peaceful, not painful.
Yeah.
I hope it's quick, and I hope it's not today. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Exactly.
Well, how do you handle like grandpa and grandma, or, when you come across someone who is elderly, how do you deal with it?
I just try to be nice.
I mean, do they have any inclination that you're weirded out?
I don't know. I hope not. I hope I'm polite, but I don't know. It creeps me out. Like, little kids living with their grandparents. Like, what if their grandparents just die, It could happen.
No, I'm not laughing at you, Amy. Please forgive me.
No, I know.
I'm not making fun of you in your moment of crisis here, but this is an interesting one to me. I get fear of spiders, fear of heights, fear of flying, fear of the water, but the fear of old people. What happens, Amy? What happens when one day you turn 80?
Yeah, I'm really scared to be old.
But it doesn't have to be bad. I mean, there are a lot of wonderful people who experience life in so many wonderful ways at the age of 60, 70, 80 plus. They maximize every moment. You might be the hippest, most awesome elderly person on planet Earth. You never know, right?
Well, I hope so.
And what happens if a little Amy walks up to you when you're 85 and is like, oh, it's Amy, and she's 80.
Then I'll say boot.
They'll turn the tables on you, just like that. Well, you're a great sport, Amy. That's an interesting phobia. I think the audience is interested as well. I wonder if there's a name for that, fear of the elderly.
I'm sure. There's fear of everything.
It's all right. I'm going to go look it up, okay? I'm going to go look it up. Amy.
Okay.
You are awesome. I so appreciate you listening and participating. Thank you very much for being a part of the show today.
Okay, thank you.
Hang on, let me look. The fear of the, should I say phobia of the elderly? It pops right up. Gerontophobia. The fear of growing old, or a hatred or fear of the elderly. Often associated with the fact that someday all young people will grow old, and that old age is associated with death. This unwillingness to accept death manifests in feelings of hostility and discriminatory acts toward the elderly. And we learned something new today. We learned a new phobia today. I mean, at least I did. Wasn't aware of that one. I have Sean on Skype. You're on the Thinking Atheist radio podcast. How's it going?
Hey, Seth, I'm great, thanks. How are you?
I'm well. Are you afraid of anything? Do you have any irrational fears? Anything for the show today?
Well, I wouldn't say it's irrational. It's more rational. I suffer from sleep paralysis.
Oh, yeah, I'm very familiar with it. Actually, I have sleep paralysis a couple times a year. Describe the experience for you.
Well, it's terrifying. So I say it's a rational fear because at the time it feels so real. But during the daytime, like now, I realize it was all just like a dream. So basically, I wake up usually from a nightmare. So my mind is already a bit scared and jumpy and everything. And I realize, wait a minute, I'm not in my bedroom. Like, it looks like my bedroom, but everything's different. Like, it might be the bedroom in my old house, which I used to think was haunted, by the way. So that might have an influence on it. Or it's my current bedroom in my new apartment, but things are like different. And I know there's an intruder.
It feels like there's a presence in the room. This is a common thing with sleep apnea. There's a shape, a shadow. It's human-esque. Many times they loom over you. Do you have that sensation, Sean, like you're trapped in the bed and something's looming right next to you?
Yep, but other times I notice this presence in the house. And if I only just stayed still, it might not know I was awake, But other times, yes, I'm aware of this presence, and that's when it gets really terrifying because if the door usually opens, I sleep with my door closed, and usually this thing comes in.
Many people who are religious see this as a visitation by a demon. They think it's some sort of a spirit, like a dark, malevolent entity. And it would be easy to see where they would come to that conclusion, right? You sort of get that demon vibe sometimes.
Well, it's funny. When I was religious, I used to think it was demons and demons attacking me. So I would pray to Jesus and ask him to stop it from happening. And sometimes it worked, but other times didn't. This was back before I actually researched it and realized it was all just dream imagery. So I could have prayed to Superman and he would have saved me. And then as I moved on from religion, I got into, psychics and ghosts and all of that stuff. And I used to believe it was ghosts and spirits. So I can see how people would mistake it for hauntings or demons or even alien visitations. I mean, I'm sure a lot of these UFO stories can be explained by sleep paralysis.
For those who aren't familiar with sleep paralysis, there is a documentary about it. You can find it on Netflix. The first 30 minutes are fantastic. It's called The Nightmare, and they do a fantastic job of recreating what people who experience sleep paralysis see and hear and feel. I mean, it's like they crawled into my own skull because it was much like some of the scary shit that I remember from the few times a year it happens to me. But I was hoping the documentary would address more of the science of sleep paralysis. Essentially, your body is conditioned for REM sleep, where when you dream, your body's not moving. Because if you were running or swimming or something in a dream, if you were to act out those things while lying in the bed, you'd be flailing everywhere. So the brain essentially paralyzes the body. In sleep paralysis, you're coming out of sleep. You are marginally conscious. You can actually see around the room. You can hear, you can experience the room to a degree, but you are still paralyzed. You feel a sense of helplessness, of paralysis. Your heart races, your breathing becomes rampant, and then there is often a sense of another presence in the room. So now you're really freaked out, right? Do you have that feeling of helplessness? Holy shit, there's something right next to me, and I can't move. Does that happen to you, Sean?
Yes, but because it happens to me so often, I wake up and I'm like, oh, it's happening again. And then I realize it's all dream imagery. So I can sometimes prepare myself. Like, I imagine there's this invisibility cloak around me, and I sort of become invisible to all the presences and all the spirits and everything. And they can actually get up and move around and interact with the dream imagery or even float up above my bed. So it can be really cool if you know the techniques.
Sean, it happens to me a couple of times a year. And what happens to me is I end up making apparently some awful sound, while I'm lying in bed. And Natalie startles out of her sleep and then reaches over and just jostles me, and I snap right out of it. But I can't imagine those people who have this happen to them almost every time they close their eyes. I think that would... you'd have a phobia about sleeping, or it might not even be an irrational fear. You'd be genuinely terrified that you'd be thrust into this weird negative dream space, So.
Yeah, you would be. And there are some nights where even I'm afraid of going back to sleep. And you can almost sense it will happen if you go back to sleep.
That is a fear that unless you've experienced it, it's hard for others. Mm-hmm. I would encourage, see if it's still on Netflix. Don't bother with the whole damn thing. But the first 30 minutes of the documentary called The Nightmare is actually worth watching because it does effectively transport you into what sufferers of sleep paralysis actually experience. Well, Sean, I appreciate you sharing that with us. That's actually a great fit for, the sort of scary Halloween season. I hope you get a peaceful night's rest tonight, though, and many nights
Great,
to come.
Thanks, Seth. I'm sure I will, and thanks for letting me chat with you. I've been a fan for years, so it's great to get to talk to you.
It's my honor, my friend. You have a great one.
You too. Thanks, Seth.
Area code 315. You're on the Thinking Atheist radio podcast. Who's this?
This is Johnny Ridgway.
Johnny, talk to me about your phobias. Do you have them, or did you have them?
I do. Let me set this up for you. I am terrified of helium balloons. It's just I can be around them. They can be in the room. I cannot hold them. I cannot hold a helium balloon. I've got 2 young daughters. They love them. And even at birthday parties, I go to touch one. Can't do it.
Because you're afraid of the balloon popping?
I have no rational explanation whatsoever for this fear. It's something about when I'm holding them, looking up. It's I've never had vertigo, but I think that might be what it feels like. It's kind of like looking up and looking down at the same time, and it throws me off, man.
Has nothing to do with the clown from the movie It or anything then?
Nothing to do with that. Nothing that it doesn't even have to be like the anamorphic, like Elmo helium balloons you'd get for a kid's birthday party. Any balloon with a string that floats, I have absolutely irrational fear of.
All right. Well, I hope you have a balloon-free future, at least until your fear is overcome. Okay, Johnny?
All right.
Area code 319. You're on the Thinking Atheists radio podcast. Tell me your name.
Sarah.
It is Fears and Phobias today, Tara. What do you have for the show? What's your phobia?
So my biggest phobia, and probably the weirdest one, is French dressing. Something that has scarred me. Wait.
Hang on, Tara. Hang on. All right. Salad dressing.
Yeah.
French dressing scares you.
Specifically, yes. Very
you got to
much
spell
so.
this one out for me. You got to help me with this. I mean, how does this manifest itself? Like you're at the buffet, you're at the dinner table. What?
It's really strange. I don't remember where it originated from, but I'm from a small town in Illinois where it's kind of a staple. There's a popular pizza restaurant, and everyone dips it in French dressing, and it's just always kind of been around. And ever since I can remember, it has really just made me absolutely terrified. My dad has told me stories from when I was like 3 or 4 years old, where I would actually pass out if it was around. And he took me to a doctor for it, and they don't know why I would be afraid of something like that either.
Tara.
A lot of people think I know.
Is this real? Are you real?
I'm so serious. It's like I'm getting weak in my knees even talking about it right now.
I mean,
it's really bizarre.
It's not just that you don't like it. It's that you are afraid of French dressing, salad dressing.
I'm literally terrified. Like I
I will immediately start crying and going into a panic attack if it's even around me. I will completely ignore the salad dressing aisle in a grocery store. If it's even in the fridge, I won't touch anything around it. It's a real phobia. It started with almost all salad dressings. I wasn't necessarily scared of the other dressings, but I wouldn't even eat salad because I didn't want to put salad dressing on my salad. What I remember is that I felt like the French dressing would like suffocate the salad. That's what I always thought, and it just never went away from there.
So now if it's like oil and vinegar, you're okay. Thousand Island, you're okay.
No, the only salad dressing I will eat is ranch. That's the only one. I'm not scared of the others, but I just really don't. They're too similar of a thing that I don't even want to be around it. It is really bizarre, but so many people know this about me too, like that it's almost common now in my life. People are like, oh yeah, she's the weird girl afraid of French dressing. So it's definitely real. And I like get weak in my knees. I'll start crying immediately, and I'm pretty tough. Like nothing really scares me other than this and like veins.
Well, I hope this call hasn't traumatized you too much. It's just I was interested in this story, and I'm already picturing in my mind the Scary Movie poster with a bottle of French dressing on the front.
Oh God. No, I'll be honest, like talking about it, I was like, I don't know if I can. Like right now I'm pacing back and forth because I'm just thinking about how bizarre it is in general.
Let's just skip on. You know what? Kittens and rainbows, and let's we can think about other things. All right. So clear your mind. It's all good.
Yeah.
Okay, Tara?
Okay.
That's awesome. Well, we know what not to dress up as if we're going to Tara's house to trick or treat this Halloween. Thanks for sharing your story. That is fantastic.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
I have area code 760. You're on the Thinking Atheist Radio podcast. Tell me your name.
Nancy.
Hi, Nancy. We're talking about phobias, irrational fears. Do you have an irrational fear? Something that makes you cringe, that keeps you up at night, or something else?
Yes, I do. I actually am quite terrified of needles.
Getting an injection, an IV, giving blood type thing?
Yes, exactly. All of those things. All of the above.
That's not too uncommon. I hear that quite a bit. People get nervous about going in to get a shot. Do you think about it? I got to go to the doctor. I hope they don't give me a shot kind of thing?
Yes. And I've actually recently been trying to conquer that fear with some success and some slight failures, I'll say.
Wait, how do you conquer that fear? You're not injecting yourself.
No.
Yeah, all right.
I've actually been trying to get a job in a hospital setting, more on the administrative side of things. And so, being around patients, they have to make sure that you're current on all the vaccinations and flu shots and that sort of thing. So I've been able to get a few vaccinations without too much difficulty. I have to distract myself and not look at the needle, and I might sing a stupid song. Distraction
You're coping.
is key.
You're coping,
Yeah.
right? You found a way to sort of get through it.
Yeah, exactly. Although a few weeks ago, I had to do a blood draw. And somehow that is far, far worse for me than just an injection. I don't know why.
Walk me through that day. What was it like?
Yeah, that was a pretty strange day. So I knew I had to have a blood draw because they had to check for what's known as titers to make sure that you still have the antibodies for a particular vaccine or something like that. So I, showed up at the hospital. I took my husband with me so I could squeeze his hand and the whole thing, and he could distract me and talk to me. And I ended up passing out afterwards. I literally remember him going, "Hey, you're done. I'm so proud of you." And me going, "I don't feel so good." And then him telling me, "Oh yeah, all of your color is gone." And I just passed clean out. It was a good thing I was still sitting down.
You just fainted.
I just fainted. Yeah. And one of the nurses sat with us for a long time, and she was very sweet, and I was so grateful for her. But she said that she's had plenty of patients who've even donated blood before, and then just on a random draw, they have passed out afterwards.
So I'm looking at a post that I saw from you, or an email I had seen from you, and I have to bring this up. Your icon, if I'm seeing it right, is Maud Lebowski from The Big Lebowski. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
You a big Lebowski fan?
Yes, yes. My husband is the dude, and since I am a redhead artist, I am Maud.
We can be friends, you and me. We are buds. You know, Big Lebowski was one of those films that when I first saw it, when it first released back in late 90s, I didn't really get it, and I stumbled upon it years later, and I just fell in love with it. Like I got it. And it has become one of my favorite movies of all time. And it's a very polarizing film because you can show it to people, and while you're busy laughing your ass off, the person sitting next to you isn't getting any of it. You know, have you had that experience with The Big Lebowski? No?
Yes, I have. Actually, it took me a couple of viewings to finally get it all together because it is a little weird in places, and you're thinking, what does this have to do with the story? But you just kind of have to let go and give up your preconceptions or your disbeliefs or your whatever and just let it take you on that ride.
You just got to go. I think it's really more about the characters than any plot or story. It's more about watching the dude and Walter and Donnie. I think it's more about just sort of being there with them in the moment. So the next time you go in for a blood draw, then if they take too long to find the vein, you can just look up and be like, this aggression will not stand, man. And then see if they get the reference.
Right. Exactly. That's the perfect way to put that. I'm so going to do that next time, Seth.
This aggression will not stand.
That's right. It won't.
Nancy, you're awesome. Thank you so much for talking to me today, and I hope you have a great one, okay?
Thank you.
Area code 928, you're on the Thinking Atheist radio podcast. Who's this?
My name is Jesse.
Talking about phobias, Jesse. Let's talk about yours.
Well, I have agoraphobia. Basically a fear of crowds, open places, things of that nature.
Well, flesh it out for me. Are you housebound? Do you go out?
I was housebound for 18 months back in '03. No longer housebound, thankfully. I don't go out very often.
Share as much as you're comfortable with, but, what's it like?
Well, when I was housebound, it got so bad I couldn't leave my porch. That was pretty bad. It's almost like there's there's a tiger sitting on your front porch and you're not opening that door.
Were you comforted inside, or did you feel imprisoned?
Both. Both. It's strange. It's both at the same time. It's you feel safe at home, but then your rational brain is saying there's nothing to be afraid of, and you're basically in prison. It's torturous.
You managed to overcome to a degree. Then you're doing better these days. How'd that happen?
Oh, yeah, quite better. There's different, there's obviously medications. You speak with therapists and psychiatrists. And the way I tend to explain getting better or working at it, I liken it to like a cold pool of water where when you first get in, it's very uncomfortable. It's cold and you don't want to be in there. But the longer you're in it, the easier it is. So it's like that with me. The more often I go out, the more often I face the fear, the easier it becomes.
Having been someone who's navigated this and continues to, if there was someone listening, and I've come to discover how commonplace this particular phobia is, do you have any words of advice for somebody listening who might be agoraphobic, afraid to go outside?
Yes. My advice is work at going out, because the more you do go out, and I know it's terrifying, but the more you do, the easier it becomes. And eventually you can get to a place where you might not even have any panic at all.
So one day it's the porch, the next day maybe a step past, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, there was a movie, What About Bob?
I was going to bring that movie up.
Yeah.
I always think about the elevator scene, right?
Yeah, baby steps, yeah.
For those who aren't following me, by the way, Bill Murray is someone who suffers from a series of phobias, and he takes baby steps into an elevator. Of course, he's claustrophobic, and as the elevator's going down, you just hear this horrible, wrenching scream. It's played for comedy in the film, but it just is something I've remembered. So baby steps was kind of the recurring mantra that he would quote to himself all the times. But there's some truth to that, right? I mean, don't try to take everything with one bite, just baby steps.
That's true. And also, I've found that the reverse is true. Like, the more you stay in and avoid going out and even working on it, as hard as it is, the more you stay in, the worse it becomes. So the harder it gets to get out. So yeah, definitely, like you said, one day the porch, the next day maybe check your mail if you can, things like that.
I'm going to talk to Dr. Caleb Lack near the end of the broadcast, and we're going to talk more about phobias, the different types of phobias, categories, how to perhaps overcome them, and the different solutions, not just, practicing the baby steps, but other solutions out there for people. And so we're going to get into more of that, the mental health aspect of it. Jesse, I appreciate you sharing your story, your phobia with us. And, I hope it's a good October and a great Halloween for you and yours. Okay, my friend?
It's my birthday today, so it was a great honor and pleasure to speak with you, and it was amazing. So,
well, happy birthday.
Thank you, Seth.
After sort of parading through this potpourri of phobias on the broadcast, I thought it might be good to actually talk about the science behind the treatment of phobias. What do you do when you have an irrational fear? And that leads right into my special guest, Dr. Caleb Lack. Caleb, good to have you on the radio again, my friend.
Thanks, Seth.
You are an educator, right? You teach where?
I'm at the University of Central Oklahoma.
And you teach what?
Well, I'm a clinical psychologist. And so most of my work there focuses actually on training our graduate students to become mental health clinicians.
We're talking about phobias on this show. And I'm interested in some of the mind science behind it. You deal a lot with people who have irrational fears?
Yeah, so my clinical specialty is actually in dealing with people who have anxiety and fear-based kinds of disorders, whether that's something like a phobia or obsessive-compulsive disorder or social anxiety or things like that.
You consider OCD to be a fear-based issue? Is it being afraid not to do this routine?
Yeah, so it very much is. In OCD, what we see is that people have a intrusive, unwanted, unpleasant thought, an obsession. And then they become afraid that if they don't do some sort of a compulsive act to negate it, to make it go away, to try and get rid of the feared consequences, that terrible things will happen.
So as I was doing my research for the broadcast, I saw, and correct me if this is wrong, but I want you to elaborate, that a lot of the phobias sort of broke down into two main categories. The first category was like a specific. Like, I'm claustrophobic or I'm arachnophobic, where there's a specific instance of fear regarding a specific thing or circumstance. And the other was like an overall agoraphobia, like I'm afraid to go out, I'm afraid to face the world. Does that ring true?
Well, so a lot of people really enjoy kind of attaching specific labels to fears and phobias, right? So you've got your clown fear and your snake fear, and we've got these nice Latin names for them.
I've got a clown fear. Yeah, I've got that. I'm sorry, didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
So does my little brother. So
okay.
It's all right. He won't go see it with me. So generally, though, what we tend to break them down to clinically is we tend to break them down into situational or natural environment phobias, which are things like claustrophobia, fear of enclosed spaces, or being afraid of storms, or driving over bridges, or things like that. So that's kind of one group, and we treat all of those in a very, very similar fashion. And then the other group is what we call blood injection injury phobia, which is where I don't want to get a shot, or I maybe faint if I see blood, or I can't go to the dentist, or things like that. And we can treat those very effectively, but we have to treat them in a little bit of a different manner than we do the other kinds of phobias.
Talk to me about treatment. We've already heard one of our, he was an agoraphobic, was talking about kind of baby steps to the front door, baby steps to the porch, down the stairs to the mailbox, slowly introducing himself to the object of his fears. But let's talk about some of the treatments, some of the solutions.
So for what we would call a simple or a specific phobia, meaning I've got one sort of situation, one sort of animal, insect, what have you, that I'm greatly afraid of, the best treatment is what we call exposure with response prevention, or EXRP. And in exposure and response prevention, what you do is you gradually and systematically expose someone to whatever it is that's causing their fear response. And then you prevent their normal anxiety-based fear. and kind of how they respond to that. So, for example, let's say that you're afraid of clowns. What would you normally do when you see a clown? If you're afraid of them, you're going to look the other way. You're going to get out of that situation. You're going to leave the circus tent, wherever you happen to be. And you're going to escape, right? You're going to escape. You're going to get out of that situation, which makes a lot of sense because you're upset, you're afraid, you're worried something bad's going to happen. And then when you escape that situation, what happens is you feel better, right? My fear goes down. My heart stops beating so fast. I stop sweating, and I feel better. What that does, though, is that actually reinforces your fear. And the whole definition of a phobia is revolving around the fact that this is a fear that is irrational, that is way too much compared to how it should normally be. So if I'm afraid of a snake, I can be afraid of a snake in a very normal sense. Like, let's say that I'm out working in my pasture and I happen to step on something and it's a snake and I'm very afraid. I jump back. That's perfectly normal. But if I have a snake phobia, that would mean that maybe I don't even go outside, right? Like there's too much out there. There's too many chances for danger. So what happens whenever you start avoiding things that make you a little upset or uncomfortable is that just reinforces that fear. In psychology, this is a kind of learning that we call negative reinforcement, where I do an action and something bad is taken away. In this case, I avoid some sort of fear-based object or situation. Therefore, my fear is taken away. My anxiety is taken away. So in treatment, what we have to do, this is a behavioral therapy, again, called exposure and response prevention. So you carefully assess what it is that's making someone upset. You then build what we call a fear hierarchy around that object or situation. So if, for example, you're afraid of clowns, it's probably not that any and all clown-related stimuli give you the exact same amount of fear. For example, watching the new Stephen King movie versus seeing a cartoon of a clown, those are going to provoke very different responses. And so what we have to do is we have to create this hierarchy of least feared to most feared kinds of situations. So at the bottom might just be something like saying the word clown, for example. Maybe it doesn't really make too much of an anxiety blip, maybe just a little bit, maybe like a 5 out of 100, right? And then up a little bit further would be just seeing an image of a quote unquote a non-scary clown, right? And then at the top might be going to the circus where there's a whole lot of clowns around, or going to a Shriners convention or something like that. And so we really carefully break these different situations down. We make them as specific as we can. And we start towards the bottom of this hierarchy, towards the lower amount of the hierarchy. And what we do is we expose you to that situation. So, for example, you start watching a video of a clown at a birthday party. And then we prevent your normal anxiety-based response. So in this case, you would probably normally turn that video off, look away, start talking to distract yourself, start making jokes to try and get your mind off the fact that there's this clown here. And what we instead make you do is we just make you sit with that anxiety, sit with that fear. Because what we know is that fear doesn't last forever. And if you actually sit with that fear, what's going to happen is I expose you to the stimuli, you get fearful, but then your fear can only go so high. Now, people think their fear is going to go so high that their heart's going to explode, but that's not actually what happens, right? Your fear goes high, and then it levels off and it plateaus. And then, usually relatively quickly, within 10 minutes, 15 minutes, your fear has not just plateaued, but it's actually started going down and decreasing. And the longer you stay exposed to that same sort of stimuli without escaping, without withdrawing, the less and less and less your fear goes.
I got a buddy, when he was a kid, he told me this story over lunch one day. He's afraid of heights, afraid of getting up on the roof of the house to do some work on shingles or something, and his dad was like, "You're going to get up here." And he's like, "I'm afraid of heights." And so his father forced him. Like, "I'm going to teach you. You're going to see there's nothing to be afraid of." And so essentially threw him into the deep end. Is there any merit to that? Forget the baby steps and just throw somebody into the 100% scenario of whatever they're afraid of? Or does that do more damage than good?
Well, so that's actually what we call flooding techniques or flooding exposures, where you don't start small, you don't start gradual, you just go top level. And those work, and they work actually very, very well. The problem with them is twofold. One is getting people to agree to do them.
Oh, yeah, I can imagine. Hey, I'm afraid of clowns. Let's go see it. I mean, that would be a problem for
Let's go see it in a theater full of clowns, right? Like that would be like an ultimate level exposure, right?
Okay.
So it's hard to get people to agree to do them up front. And then two, you have to be very, very careful when you are doing it not to let somebody escape and get out of that situation.
Well, you're taking away their sense of control, though, right? I mean, now they feel more out of control because you're keeping them in the room. Does that damage them in some way, or?
Oh, no. So you're not like, strapping people down and forcing them.
Okay. All right.
Clockwork Orange style. They're agreed to doing this. But what you do as a therapist in this sort of situation is you help them be able to stay in the situation, not distract themselves, not escape and get out of the situation. So flooding does work, and it can work very well, but it's often much more difficult to do well. It's harder on the people who are trying to get over their fears and their phobias. That's why we usually recommend this more graduated exposure, where you start lower, where things are, yeah, it's problematic, it's scary, but I'm much more easily able to endure that than I would the top ultimate kind of exposure.
Do you have a whole toolkit? I mean, everyone walks in with a different phobia. Someone may say it's eyes, anything to do with eyes, or thumbs, or, cats, or Republicans. I mean, whatever they're afraid of. I mean, do you have some sort of trick that you use for all these specific things? You have an arsenal ready?
So to me anyway, this is mostly what I do in terms of my clinical work is exposure therapy. And to me, it's really rewarding because not only did I get to help people, but I get to get incredibly creative while I'm doing so. And so it's one of these things where it's not that, everybody that comes in, they have different kinds of fears, they have different kinds of obsessions, but the process for treating them is the same. You just have to find different stimuli. So whether that's someone who's afraid of blood, and you have to learn how to mix up a 5-gallon bucket of blood, fake blood, in order to be able to stick your hands in it, and they don't actually know that it's fake, of course. Or whether it's someone who is afraid of heights and you have to get your ladder out and find somewhere nice and kind of scary to go climbing on your ladder. Or whether it's someone who's afraid, and this is someone I've had in the past, who was afraid of roadkill. And they couldn't drive down a road that had roadkill on it because they were afraid that they were going to inhale some of the germs and get sick. So what do we have to do? Well, I had to go get in my farm truck, get my shovel, drive around until I found some fresh roadkill, bring it back to the office, put it in the parking lot, and then we had to walk around in the parking lot sniffing, roadkill for a half hour.
Boy, mental health profession's a glamorous business, definitely.
It truly is.
Definitely, yeah.
It certainly requires you to get creative, and it requires you to be able to kind of balance, hey, I'm helping this person, but I'm helping them by making them more distressed in the short term.
You're customizing the treatment for each person.
Oh, yeah. It becomes a very, very highly customized, individualized treatment. Because even if, let's say I've got 2 people who are afraid of snakes, well, there's a good chance that they're not exactly the same level of afraid of all different kinds of snake-related stimuli, right? I might have someone who I say the word snake and they get chills and they can't handle it, whereas somebody else can say the word snake just fine. That doesn't bother them. But if I see one, then that's where I have problems.
Well, look, Caleb, let's say I walk in, I've got a fear of whatever, and I walk in and I'm like, I want drugs. Right. Just there's got to be a pill that I can take to shut off whatever center of my brain is causing all this. You probably see a lot of that. What do you do?
So we actually know that for all of the anxiety-based problems, but particularly for fears and phobias, medication doesn't work. Medication does not work at all for fears and phobias. There's no medication out there that helps. What does help is this particular kind of behavioral therapy. And what's really, really cool about it is that for someone who comes in with a simple phobia, let's say a snake, clowns, bees, heights, I can usually have that phobia treated in about 2 to 3 hours. And when I say treated, I mean to a normal level, a non-clinical level of fear, that for about 95% of people will last anywhere from 5 to 10 years at a minimum. So when we're talking fears and phobias, behavioral therapy really is the way to go. Medication's just going to not help at all with that. Now, other things like, for example, social anxiety or obsessive compulsive disorder, the SSRI class, the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor class of drugs, things commonly known by like Prozac and Zoloft, those do certainly help to modulate some of the anxiety and the fear associated with those kinds of problems, but only for people in the most severe clinical realm. So people who might qualify for a diagnosis, but would have more mild to moderate symptoms of social anxiety, generalized anxiety, OCD, they're not really going to see much more effect than a placebo level effect from a medication. It's really at the severe end of the clinical range that we see that medications start to become effective and useful.
That doesn't work for me, Caleb. I mean, I just want a pill. I just want a quick fix. I want to be able to just ingest something.
Like Quaaludes or something, I guess. And
well, what kind of practice are you running over there, man? I know you've been generous with your time here, but tell me about this eye movement therapy. I've been, reading about EMDR, and I have no idea. Is it legit? What is it?
No. So EMDR, or eye movement desensitization retraining, is probably one of the most heavily commercialized pseudoscientific treatments of the last 30 years. What you do, supposedly in EMDR, is you come in, sit down in therapy room, you then close your eyes, you relax, and then someone directs you to do what they call bilateral stimulations, which can be abbreviated as BS, which is helpful. And this is either moving your eyes back and forth or tapping your legs in an alternate rhythm or hearing sounds in your ears in an alternating rhythm. And while you're doing that, you're then supposed to think about and recall the situations that make you uncomfortable or unhappy or the traumatic event. And you do that until you feel better. Now, what's really interesting about EMDR is that when you do a clinical trial on EMDR works. People get better. Their PTSD symptoms in particular, which is what it's been most well validated on, they go down. But they don't go down because of why the EMDR people say they go down. And the reason we know this is from what we call dismantling research, where we take a treatment package that we know works, and we then break it down into its component parts. And we test those component parts to see what's actually causing the change. So if I've got a treatment package that has 4 different pieces to it, I'll break it down and see which of those 4 pieces is actually causing the change. And so we've done this with EMDR. And in EMDR, what we see very clearly is that the eye movements or the bilateral stimulations, when you take those away, you get just as well as when you have them there, which means that they're not actually doing anything.
Another form of placebo, then.
It's what we call in the field, it's what we call a purple hat therapy. Because what you have is you actually have an effective treatment, which is exposure and response prevention. That's what's happening when someone sits down and you don't let them escape the situation and they just think about or tell you about, this trauma over and over and over again. That's actually what we would call imaginal exposure. So I'm exposing you to your memories of that situation. And then what the MDR people do is they threw on this extra piece, these bilateral stimulations, which it turns out do nothing. You do them by themselves, they do nothing. You do the treatment without those, you get just as well. So this is the equivalent of me taking any sort of effective treatment, let's say exposure and response prevention for phobias, and you come in and I say, hey, here's what we're going to do today. We're going to expose you to this clown. We're going to watch this video of a clown. But while we're doing it, I want you to wear this purple hat. And this is a magic purple hat that will help you get even better. And I say, oh, okay, shit, a purple hat. That sounds awesome. I love purple. So I put my hat on. I do my exposure by watching the video. And then afterwards, I'm like, you know what? I do feel better. It must be this hat. When in reality, it has nothing to do with the hat.
That probably creates a whole different scenario where you become married to the idea of this crutch.
Yeah, when what you're doing is you're attributing, the hard work that you're doing to some sort of other external force, right? It was these magic eye movements, or it was this magic tapping that I did. When in reality, it was you facing your fear and not giving up, standing your ground, That's what actually made you get better. Had nothing at all to do with, the magic hat or the placebo level eye movements or anything like that.
You can lose weight and be healthier if you'll eat right, drink a gallon of water a day, exercise, and put this metal triangle on your head kind of thing, right?
Exactly. You do all these other things and this thing I'm selling you.
Yeah.
Which is really what EMDR is. And it's one of those things, and you've known me for a while, I very much try to fight against pseudoscience and try and instill critical thinking in people. And this is one of those things that I battle all the time because people see it used and it works. And it does work. It just doesn't work because of why they think it works. It works because they took something we already knew worked and they put this bullshit on top of it.
We've been having some fun with phobias as people share their stories. I mean, we've heard some great ones. Someone was afraid of salad dressing, which I think may be my favorite phobia of the show, And so we're sharing these stories. We're all laughing. But the truth is, for many people, it can be debilitating. It can be really scary. I always like to give resources if someone is struggling with a phobia. And it's amazing because in my research, it was interesting to realize how many people know it's irrational. Like they realize I shouldn't be afraid of this. They don't have to be told it's irrational. They already know. Where would you send them if they were looking for sort of a way through and a way out of their own irrational fears?
Well, so there's a couple of different things.
And you can plug your own book here if you want. I mean, I'm good. I just go for it,
One option is finding a good provider who actually knows how to treat fears and phobias. Now, sadly, that's not as easy as it sounds. You can't just walk into any therapist's office and say, hey, can you get me over this fear? Because most of them would probably be like, sure, I can. And then they don't. They don't know what they're doing. So when you look for a mental health provider, if you're trying to find a psychologist or a, professional counselor or something like that, you need to ask them if they have experience treating fears, phobias, using exposure and response prevention. That's key, is treating it using exposure and response prevention, because that's what we know works. Other things don't work. So that's one. And you could certainly, try and find those through therapy finders. One of those that I would recommend is actually the Association for Behavioral and Cognitive Therapies, or abct.org. Those folks tend to have a much higher familiarity with using exposure and response prevention. You could also try the Secular Therapy Project, which I'm the director of. And this is free. It's a list of folks in your area that you can search who've been vetted to make sure they're using evidence-based practices. If you want to try and go on in your own and do this, there's actually a really nice book out there that's called Mastering Your Fears and Phobias. And it's by Martin Antony. And you can order it through Amazon or anywhere else. And it just sort of walks you through these steps, that you can do at home. And it's a really great book. If you just want to learn more about these kind of things, you could certainly check out some of my books. I published one called Anxiety Disorders, an Introduction. That's a relatively short, under 100-page book that kind of tells you what works and kind of what anxiety looks like. If you have OCD, I've got a book that I edited that came out with some of the top names in the field called Obsessive Compulsive Disorder, Etiology, Phenomenology, and Treatment. That goes into that a lot.
And I'll go ahead and select the website for you at CalebLack.com. Caleb with a C, CalebLack.com. Dr. Caleb Lack. Thanks for helping me cap the show with some science and hopefully some solutions about these phobias. Greatly appreciate it, my friend.
All right. Thanks, Seth. Take care.
We'll call it a show. I'll see you back here next Tuesday with probably a really controversial opinion about the quote-unquote death of the atheist movement. Now, is the movement dying? This is some of what we hear out there. I'm going to weigh in for you next week, and I'll see you then. Take care.
Follow The Thinking Atheist on Facebook and Twitter. Watch dozens of original videos on the Thinking Atheist YouTube channel. And visit our website for resources, links, contact information, the editor's blog, and more. thethinkingatheist.com.